for those of you that have attended training with me before, this session this week will be a little bit different in that this will be recorded and shared. And because of that, we will have to edit out any participant conversations. So the goal here is going to be more presentation from me for this first session, and then for any of the first sessions of the month. And so this month's theme is technical foundations. This week will be kind of the kickoff. They're calling them Master Talks in honor of Ron LeMaster. And then next week will be clarification. The following week will be practice. And the week after that will be application. So that'll repeat through the summer. The month of July, the theme will be building movement analysis and tech process. So preparing for exams. And same thing, the first week will be a presentation. The second week of July will be clarification. The third week will be practice. The fourth week will be application. The theme for August will be looking at the teaching side of things, assess and plan for an experiential learning environment. The month of September will be implementing and reflecting as part of the teaching process. And October will be on the people skills side of things, relationships built on trust and two-way communications. So that kind of overall layout for the summer, and we'll see the first session will be more of a presentation each month. So that'll be tonight, July 1st, August 5th, September 2nd, and October 7th. The first Tuesday of each month, that'll be that kind of more recorded presentation. There will be some time for some question and answer and discussion at the end of the presentation. But the idea is they want to minimize the editing, so they'll be able to trim out the front and trim the tail end of the presentation to just the recorded presentation and post that for people to watch. And that way, anyone that couldn't make it tonight will be able to watch that recording and still participate the next 3 weeks based on tonight's conversation around technical foundations. So that said, some of you may have seen pieces of this presentation before. This is really the goal with tonight is to set strong technical foundations. So we're all having conversations from the same perspective and same starting point throughout the entire summer. So we'll be going over the snowboarding fundamentals, looking at some movement analysis and how the snowboarding fundamentals relate to movement analysis, and just kind of kicking off this summer with that technical side of things and looking at board performances. This is being recorded, like I said, and we'll save kind of questions and comments for the end. So if you've got a notepad or a place to take notes, if there's questions that pop up, feel free to put them in the chat as well, and we can look at those when we get to the end. There is a feedback form to fill out. This is a clinic roster, and this is how they'll be tracking attendance this summer. This is super key as we ideally want to continue to grow this and offer more training through next summer. So posting that in the chat right now, and I'll share that again towards the tail end of this call. The clinic leaders through this summer will be myself, Sam Reichstein out of Beaver Creek, Lindsay Stevens from Vail, Jazz Gilbert out of Breckenridge, Mark Laws at Keystone, Jesse Yedwab also out of Breckenridge, and Noah Hopkins out of Breckenridge. So we'll be kind of spearheading this training this summer and looking to continue to add additional trainers as we look towards next summer. And in the winter, we'll be back to our normally scheduled training at multiple different resorts. But this summer, kind of a new initiative, pooling the training budget across multiple resorts and making these more available to instructors at any Vail resort across the world. So that's kind of the goal here with this, is adding more calls and making it all more accessible for the summer while being a little bit more efficient with our budget through the summer. For those of you that haven't attended training with me before, my name's Chris Rogers. I teach at Vail and lead training here at Vail Mountain. I'm on my third term on the national team for the Professional Ski Instructors of America and the American Association of Snowboard Instructors. I get to travel around, train. I've met most of you before and trained with most of you before on snow, and seen a number of you on these calls before. I live in Vail year round, and I do kind of put on a different hat and work for Vail Mountain in the public safety arena in the summer, just staying around the mountain and engaged with our guests. And I'm always super excited to get to run these in the winter and put the ski and snowboard hat back on and shift into winter mode. It's always a little bit of a shocker to be talking snowboarding in the middle of summer on these Zoom calls, but I love it. And I'm so stoked you guys made time tonight to join us. These will be going all summer, every Tuesday at 6 p.m. throughout the entire summer. So you feel free to put that in your calendar. And then, like I was saying before, these will all be recorded throughout the entire summer on the first Tuesday of the month. So if you miss that one, you can always review. That'll be available. They're putting the website together right now. All of those calls, the Monday night children's, the Tuesday night snowboard, alpine, and adaptive, those will all be recorded on the first session of the month. And then the second, third, and fourth sessions each month, we'll be diving into those topics more with practice, application, discussion, clarification, all of that kind of stuff. So the second, third, and fourth weeks will be more like our traditional calls with open discussion, practice time, putting it all into practice, that kind of stuff. And that goal would be, if you can't make it on the first one, you can always review the video and jump into any of those other sessions. So hopefully driving some more participation. Tonight's topic is technical foundations. We're going to be looking at the technical triangle of the learning connection model. So diving into that middle triangle, technical skills. And from PSI, AASI, these are the elements that they've bundled into that technical skills triangle. The ability to convey and apply accurate technical information, skiing, cross-country skiing, snowboarding, telemark skiing, whichever one's applicable. The movement analysis model of observe, evaluate, and prescribe. And then our discipline-specific fundamentals. Those are the pieces that they lump into that category. So for us tonight, we're really going to be focusing on these three: convey and apply accurate technical information, the observe, evaluate, and prescribe model of movement analysis, and our snowboarding fundamentals. Starting with our snowboarding fundamentals, making sure that we're all really clear on this is huge as a basis for the entire summer, because we'll be, whether we're practicing MA or getting into teaching, we want to make sure that we are working from a consistent and similar point on how we're describing the fundamentals, how we're using the fundamentals, how those apply into our teaching. So from the Google dictionary, fundamentals are forming a necessary base or core of central importance, or a central or primary rule or principle on which something is based. And we brought this in the fundamentals we've been kind of using in their current shape or form since roughly 2016, 2017 season. And they've been refined a little bit, but they go all the way back to our fundamental movements, as we called them in AASI, of flexion, extension, and rotation. This has been one of the main pillars of AASI since foundation in 1997, was that the fundamental movements were how we could move on a snowboard. And we had our snowboard performance concepts, or the board performances: tilt, twist, pivot, and pressure. The snowboarding fundamentals are combinations of those fundamental movements and snowboard performance concepts put together. And so when we look at these snowboard fundamentals, it's an evolution of the board performances, tying in the body movements that allow us to control those, and looking at not just like pressure as one, but breaking it out into three. Really expanded our ability to accurately describe and discuss what's going on with pressure, what's going on across the board, along the length of the board, and the magnitude of pressure, the amount of vertical pressure. Tilt, twist, and pivot stayed pretty much the same as they appear in the 2015 Snowboard Technical Manual, but again, describe those body movements that we're using to control them, putting them into that equation to help new instructors better understand what we're doing with our body, how that's affecting the equipment, and then what does that do to our turn or our trick outcome. So we're going to start with the three performance fundamentals, removing pressure, and just looking at these three, really diving into the pivot, tilt, and torsional twist of the snowboard, looking at these three specifically. So when we talk about controlling the board's pivot through flexion, extension, and rotation of the body, this could be controlling to create pivot or to eliminate pivot, right? Those words that were used in the fundamentals were very specific and very intentional in describing that these are things that are always happening. That definition of fundamental, these are bases, these are core ideas, and they're always happening. Whether we're in a pivot slip like Matt Larson's showing on the left picture, or a board slide like Eric's showing in the middle picture, where we're controlling pivot to create a specific outcome by pivoting the snowboard, or in a heel side toe edge grab carve there that Lindsay's showing with a lack of pivot. She's controlling that pivot by reducing the amount of pivot. So we're always controlling the board's pivot through flex, extension, and rotation of the body, whether that's to create pivot or to reduce or eliminate pivot. The other piece we want to make sure we hit on with these tech foundations is we do not always need to say the entire fundamental. Those of us that have been working with these for years know them, and I'll often switch back and forth between saying the whole thing, control the board's pivot through flex, extension, and rotation movements of the body. But it's okay to still refer back to shorthand, controlling pivot, for example. Totally fine. Looking at tilt, controlling the board's tilt through a combination of inclination and angulation. With this fundamental, again, we've got some examples of some carves happening where we're controlling tilt through a combination of inclination and angulation, as well as a skidded turn where there's not a lot of tilt. Rider's controlling tilt by not tilting the snowboard significantly. This fundamental I find worth diving into a little bit, in that it's describing three distinct concepts. The relationship between inclination and angulation has sometimes been described as a scale between those two. Is someone using inclination or are they using angulation? And I find it more helpful to discuss these through as if they were three separate concepts: tilt, inclination, and angulation. And each one of those is a dial. We can turn up or turn down the tilt. We can turn up or turn down the inclination. We can turn up or turn down the angulation. So tilt specifically referring to the amount of edge angle of the snowboard. Inclination referring to the angle of the body to the snow. How inclined is the body to the snow? And angulation being how many angles you're creating in your body. How much angulation is there in the body? Are you flexed or extended in that position? And so we could think about a super laid out Euro carve where there's really high tilt, really high inclination, and very low angulation. Or you could think about a Michael Jackson on a box where there is a really high tilt, really low inclination, the body's pretty much straight up, and very high angulation. So we're getting up on the toe edge, but we're not moving the center of mass over the edges very far. So looking at different combinations of those really helps understand these concepts better, versus thinking about inclination being on one side and angulation on the other side of a scale. We can independently control those dials. And again, we can use shorthand controlling tilt. We don't have to say the whole fundamental every time. Torsional flex, control torsional flex of the board using flexion, extension, and rotation movements of the body. In the first edition of the fundamentals, this just described flex and extension. Rotation was added in because if we're rotating our femur within our hip socket, we can create that torsional pressure on the snowboard just through that rotational movement as well. So describing this as flex, extension, and rotation movements that can create twist. And again, in a picture on the left, we're intentionally creating some twist in the snowboard by oppositional flex and extension. In the picture on the right, we show very little tilt. The rider's controlling tilt by using more simultaneous movements of the ankles, knees, and hips to move the board from one edge to another. And so we can be describing that control by either creating twist or by minimizing twist through the movements that we're using. And again, shorthand controlling twist, just fine. So looking at the Snowboard Technical Manual, the 2015 Snowboard Technical Manual, it described pressure as the act of managing the degree and location of forces between the snowboard and the snow. And it does describe it as along the length and width. And then pressure adjustments predominantly made through flexion extension movements may be applied across the entire snowboard or concentrated on smaller areas. So it does describe this as managing the degree and location of forces between the snowboard and the snow, and along the length and across the width. And this was really the foundation of drawing those out into three separate fundamentals. It wasn't identified that way specifically in the technical manual, but it does include that framework of those 3 applications of pressure. And that's how we got to the 3 fundamentals. One about controlling the relationship of the center of mass to the base of support, i.e. the snowboard, to direct pressure along the length of the board, controlling the relationship of the center of mass to the base of support to direct pressure across the width of the board, and controlling the magnitude or the amount of pressure created through the board surface interaction. These 3 are really specifically worded about controlling the relationship. It's not about controlling the center of mass over the snowboard. It's about the relationship between the snowboard and the center of mass, because we can move the snowboard underneath our center of mass, or we can move our center of mass over the snowboard, or some combination thereof. Similarly, in terms of magnitude of pressure, it could be the terrain pushing back up on us. If we're cruising through some rollers, maybe you might be having the surface pushing up on you. You might be pushing down on your snowboard. You might be pulling up on your snowboard. We could look at different pressure, magnitude of pressure applications on boxes, rails, tree jibs, in the air, snow surface, ice. Really wanted to make sure that that was inclusive of all the different things we do on our snowboard. And so that's how we ended up with those 3. So again, looking at these, pressure along the length, we have a nose press. We have a pressure pretty centered on the snowboard with Brian Donovan there in the center picture. And then Amy Bailey on the right, popping off either an ollie or a dolphin turn type move where she's got pressure on the tail of the snowboard. And looking at that as 3 basic places that we control pressure: towards the nose, towards the center of the snowboard, towards the tail, but also realizing that there's near infinite number of specific places you could put pressure along there. You can get it way out towards the nose, all the way along the length of the snowboard. You can control pressure to any of those places. You could control pressure along the length by keeping your pressure more centered, or move it out towards the nose or the tail. And we can do that by moving the center of mass over the snowboard, or by pushing the snowboard underneath our center of mass. Looking at pressure across the width, and again, 3 different applications. One with pretty minimal tilt, pressure is already over towards the toe side. A board slide where pressure is managed pretty much directly centered on the snowboard, so we're not seeing toe edge or heel edge coming off that feature. And a Eurocarve where Lindsay has the pressure way over the heel side. Really, when we talk about this fundamental, we are talking about pressure along the length of the snowboard. And so when we start getting into applications of tilt, we're not looking at that pressure moving inside the turn. That would be starting to talk about controlling tilt through inclination, angulation. You could also talk about the concept of offset with the body moving, like where the application of pressure might be outside the snowboard. But the way this fundamental is written, it is really specific to the relationship between the center mass and the base of support, and directing pressure across the width of the snowboard. So when the board is flat, if you imagine standing on a flat board and having pressure over your toes and then rolling your center mass across to your heel edge until your toes just come off the snow, that's what we're talking about with this fundamental, is that movement of pressure across the width of the snowboard. Again, either by moving the center mass over the snowboard, or in many more high intensity turns where we're moving the snowboard underneath the center mass. Once we're up on edge, pressure has already moved to that edge. So, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, how we prioritize which fundamental we talk about. As in terms of that picture of Lindsay on the right-hand side, pressure's on her heel side, but it's not really useful to use this fundamental to describe that pressure being any further over the heel side than if she just barely lifted her toes. So in terms of this fundamental, the picture on the left where the rider is just barely on their toes, and the picture on the right where the pressure is just is way over the heels, we're talking about really the same thing. Pressure is over one edge. It's not more over one edge, if that makes sense. And we can discuss that in questions later, because I know this has been one that's been a bit of a conversation lately across regions, is how are we describing that once the center mass is inside the edge? And then magnitude of pressure. So looking at the amount of pressure, and this one can be kind of funny to talk about in still images. It gets a lot easier to talk about magnitude and once there's movement, because we're looking at in still images, it's hard to tell if the rider is moving their center mass up or down or staying the same, and how that might be affecting pressure. So in these images, these are all different places where magnitude of pressure is being controlled, but looking at different applications of it. So I know the center picture is a flexing edge change. The rider is dropping their center of mass down towards the snowboard. So controlling that magnitude of pressure by moving the center mass down, which then as the center mass stops moving down, applies more pressure to the new edge. We've got pictures in the air, so we know that there was a magnitude of pressure control happening where they were pushing off the snow, increasing the amount of pressure on the snowboard or between the snowboard and the snow surface, and then either retracting or just using rebound off the snowboard to get the center mass into the air. So we've got reduced pressure on the equipment to snow surface interaction. So just looking at different ways that magnitude of pressure could be talking about the application of pressure or the reduction of pressure through a movement of the center mass. Helpful one to take a screenshot of if you don't already have this in your phone or somewhere handy. Looking at just the shorthands, being able to kind of quickly jump to these as we go through movement analysis and working on kind of how do we apply all this into what we do in our jobs. So control pressure along the length of the board, control pressure across the width of the board, control the magnitude of pressure, control the board's pivot, control the board's tilt, control the board's twist. I think with a shorthand, it's important to keep that word control in there because it's really these fundamentals are about what we're doing as the rider. And it's not just that the board can twist, it's that the fundamental is that we are always controlling the board's twist, whether that's to do something intentionally to create the twist on the snowboard, or whether that's doing something where we are preventing the snowboard from twisting. Same for any of the other fundamentals. They're always at play. And there's the full length versions if you want screenshots of that. We are currently working on an updated technical manual. The idea is for it to be released by Interski and Vail in 2027. And then they will have the snowboard fundamentals in the new version. That's well overdue for us to have these published. They are available in PDFs on the national website, but we're pretty excited to actually have them in our resource manuals starting by 2027. So for the purpose of this call and for the rest of this month and looking at summer training, it's important to consider these as fact. These are truths about snowboarding. The rider is always doing these things. I've presented this or similar versions to this presentation a number of times. We've been using these snowboard fundamentals pretty actively since 2017, since 2018, 2019, pretty full time. And we have yet to have someone raise their hand and say, hey, I figured out a way to break fundamental 6. It doesn't work in this application. They were written very intentionally to be applicable to all snowboarding. And we treat these as truths or as facts as we move through. The rider is always doing these things. And that's important as we look at how we start applying this to being able to describe riders or describe our own riding, whether that's in movement analysis or personal analysis for training for exams, or if it's just working with students. Looking at this photo of Eric Rolls making a heel side turn, he is controlling pressure along the length of the snowboard by movements of his body to put pressure on his left or right foot, move pressure fore and aft. Right now, he's pretty centered in this picture. He's controlling the amount of pivot by being in a bit of a heel side carve. It looks like from the snow spray, there might be just a little bit of pivot happening there. But again, maybe through that open hip and a little bit open shoulder, he might be just letting that heel side skid just a little bit. So there's a little bit of pivot in there. He's controlling tilt through a combination of inclination and angulation. There's some tipping of the body over the edge happening. There's also some flexion in his knees and hips, allowing him to control that angulation and control the amount of tilt he's trying to create in his snowboard. Magnitude of pressure, again, it's hard to know if you're just looking at a still image, but we can see there is some flexion in his ankles, knees, and hips, allowing him to move vertically. He's pushing back on the snowboard. The snowboard's pushing back on him a little bit. There is a relationship between the center mass and the base of support, and he is actively controlling that to create the outcomes he's trying to create. So all of these fundamentals, we're not seeing a lot of twist. He's making, we can infer that he's making simultaneous movements at this point, but he's not using oppositional movements of his legs to create additional twist. So we can make some of these assumptions based on the photo. Obviously, be a little different seeing it in motion and video, but all of them always happening. Same thing in the park. We've got a relatively flat board, so we know the rider's controlling pressure across the width of the snowboard to keep that board flat. Some similarly controlling tilt by reducing the tilt. There's not a lot of tilt happening through inclination and angulation. Pressure is slightly towards his right foot along the length of the snowboard, so he's managing that pressure along the length of the snowboard to stay on that feature. He's controlled pivot when he got onto this feature to turn the board sideways, so using flex, extension, rotation movements to turn the board into a board slide rather than staying on 50-50. You can see that through the separation in his core. He's rotated his lower body opposite to his upper body, most likely with some counter rotation to get into that position. And we'll see him use some rotation or counter rotation again as he gets off that feature to bring the board back to straight for the landing. All the fundamentals always happening, all applications of snowboarding, and that's kind of the biggest key takeaway from this presentation on the technical fundamentals, is to understand what all the snowboard fundamentals are and that they are always happening. From that, we can start looking at a common framework for movement analysis. And this is again from the Snowboard Technical Manual. The process of observing a movement, evaluating the relevance and effect of that movement on other movements in the action of the snowboard, and prescribing changes for enhanced efficiency, effectiveness, and performance. That OEP model is, when I joined PSI AASI in 2004, we were still using the TODA model, task, observation, description, analysis. We aligned with all disciplines under this observation, evaluation, prescription model. This is what all of the different disciplines within PSI AASI now use. Observation is our first eyes on our student. It can include some of the human element. We're looking at the environment, the equipment, what's going on with a CAP model. What do you know about your student? What's the task? What's going on in the snow? Where are you watching from? All of these elements tie into the observation. Evaluation is then comparing what you saw to the desired outcome. So this is real versus ideal. What did you see from your student, and what is the ideal? So we could be looking at all of these elements as kind of fitting into that evaluation phase of this model. Big key ones here: non-judgmental language. We want to be encouraging tying what they were doing back to their goals or motivations versus that was good or that was bad. They're snowboarding, right? They're doing it right if they're snowboarding, first of all. So what we're looking at is how can we make that more efficient or more effective, and bringing these elements in by comparing things like timing, intensity, duration, which is now DIRT, duration, intensity, rate, and timing, the reference alignments, the snowboarding fundamentals, cause and effect relationships. All of these pieces tie together in terms of what was the rider doing, what are we trying to get, what are we trying to help them accomplish better. Other tools that fit in within that are turn faces and ATML. Initiation, control, finish. This is another one that has had a lot of conversation going on around it right now. The Alpine Technical Manual also identifies the transition phase between turns, and this is something that will definitely be updated in the new technical manual, looking at initiation, control, finish, but also where do those happen differently in different turns. So the body movements to create a turn happen at a different time in, say, a beginner, like first time ever level 3, level 4 student making their first turn, where you're drifting down the fall line into the turn, and that edge change is maybe happening in the fall line, versus a large radius, high performance carve turn where the edge change is happening across the fall line. So looking at different schools around different regions around the country may describe initiation as what are the body movements that start the turn. And in some schools and some regions talk about what's the track in the snow. And those could be very different descriptions. So it's important as we talk about initiation, control, and finish that we are being clear about if we're talking about the body movements, or are we talking about when the turn is starting in the snow, if the line in the snow. So I tend to refer back to initiation, control, finish as these 3/3 of the track in the snow. So I might describe a movement happening in the finish of the heel side turn to initiate the toe side turn, right? The movement might be, the rider might be starting to flex in the finish of their heel side turn. And that's going to create an edge change. Someone else might describe that as the initiation because that's when the body movement started. So it's just really important. We don't have a common answer here yet. This is something the Snowboard National Task Force is working on. But as of right now, know that there are kind of two different languages that are being spoken in terms of what initiation, control, and finish is, and then what is that transition, because Alpine uses that and snowboard doesn't currently. ATML is a little bit more standardized, looking at the approach into the takeoff, into the maneuver, into the trajectory, into the landing zone. And the maneuver is kind of defined by the feature or by the airtime. So it's a little bit more clear what we're describing. Even within that, there are some fairly large zones. The approach might be 3 or 4 setup turns. The takeoff, as we all know, isn't a moment in time, but kind of from when the approach goes down the hill into flat, and that starts your transition, your takeoff. Takeoff goes from there up to the lip of the feature. So we might have a series of different movements. So a lot of times you'll hear instructors describe as they enter the takeoff, or as they actually take off the snow, as the board leaves the snow at the end of the takeoff. So you hear a lot of times like beginning or end of one of those zones of ATML, and it's a, the landing is everything from when the board touches snow to like control after. So a rider might put their board down in the landing, but then not able to control the magnitude of pressure and sits down halfway through the landing. So being able to describe those as a length of time and not a snapshot is really helpful with ATML. Another piece I want to draw attention to is the reference alignments. These have been used again since 1997 when AASI was formed, but with all the focus on the fundamentals in the last several years, people have forgotten about the reference alignments. They're still here. They're still super useful. I describe the reference alignments as similar to being at a library. The reference materials that you check out, they're not the ones you're going to take home. You're not going to go ride in reference alignment all the time. I think this is where we sometimes get the reference of the ASI robot rider is people that are trying to stay in reference alignment all the time. When you watch a high performance rider cruising down the bumps, they're not in reference alignment very often. When you watch a pro in the half pipe, or you watch somebody getting ready to spin a 1440 off a big jump at the X Games, they're not in reference alignment very often. Reference alignments are helpful as a reference, not as how we should always ride. And so, in that example of high performance riding in the bumps, if you could take a still shot out of videos, you can find frames where they're in reference alignment. Usually, as their board is coming back under their body, steering the snowboard back under their body, there will be a moment in time where they're back in reference alignment, and then they're steering the snowboard out from underneath their body, preparing for that next bump, getting ready to absorb, manage pressure, control twist, all of those things, and they're going to move back out of reference alignment. So those 3 reference alignments: shoulders, hips, parallel to the slope or terrain. Thinking about the steeper it gets, the more I want to be tipping my shoulders, my hips staying over the snowboard. I usually reference this reference alignment talking about dropping into a half pipe on a skateboard. If you keep your shoulders like where they were when you try to drop into a half pipe on a skateboard, the board's going to shoot out from underneath you. You've got to drop your shoulders into the pipe along with your hips and your knees and the skateboard to drop in on that half pipe. Center mass over the working edge and weight equally distributed between the feet. This one ties a lot to controlling pressure along the length of the snowboard and controlling pressure across the width of the snowboard. But basically, if that fundamental, or if that reference alignment isn't being met, this is where you're going to see some toe edge catches, heel edge catches, or people falling over the nose or tail. This is idea that that reference alignment is centered on the snowboard and over the working edge. And then shoulders and pelvis perpendicular to the front foot. This often gets kind of simplified down to being parallel with the snowboard. If you're running 0-0 angles, then yes, this would be parallel to the snowboard. but most of us are running 15, maybe 18, 21 degrees on that front foot. And so if we're riding in our forward stance, it would mean that if I drew a line across my shoulders, that would be perpendicular to the angle of my front foot. And again, it's just a reference alignment. It's a reference point. So if we're then able to describe that the rider is more open than that, or that they're closed to that, similar if we're looking at shoulders and hips parallel to the slope or terrain, it's that reference point. So the rider was aft. That's relative to that reference point, or the rider's fore relative to that reference point. The whole purpose of these reference alignments is when we're making descriptions that we have a starting point, something to refer back to, and that helps us with that real versus ideal comparison. Second piece here under the evaluation phase of OEP is looking at cause and effect. So cause and effect is relating the body movements, what effect they're having on the snowboard performance. And that's our snowboarding fundamentals. The body movement and board performance are already described within the fundamentals. And then cause and effect is applying that to a snowboarding outcome. So the body movement's the cause, the board performance is the effect, and the result on the snowboarding outcome, that's our cause and effect statement. How is what they're doing comparing to the desired outcome? We'll dive into that a little bit more on future calls. Prescription, final piece of this OEP model is what do we want to change and how are we going to change it? And this is like prioritizing those things that you're seeing. There's so much going on in any student. What's the one thing I'm going to focus on this next run? What do I want to change my student, and what are some exercises and drills to do that? In terms of exam movement analysis, we're really looking at that module, separating out the teaching. So this isn't a teaching plan. It's OEP. What did you see? What did you see? What was different than the ideal? And how are you going to move them a little bit closer to the ideal? What are those kind of key deficiencies that you want to key in on? Or what are the opportunities to continue to develop that rider? So applying this using those snowboard fundamentals. The most effective way I've found to describe this is movement analysis using the fundamentals adds the question, how does the rider, to the beginning of each fundamental. And again, if this is one more kind of golden nugget to take away from this, is movement analysis turns the fundamentals into a question. And it makes this question about what is that rider specifically doing to control one of these fundamentals. So how is the rider controlling pressure along the length of the board? How is the rider controlling pressure across the width of the board? The fundamental describes what that relationship is. Control the board's twist through flex, extension, rotation, movements of the body. And movement analysis asks, how is the rider controlling twist through flex, extension, rotation, movements of the body? And adding this question for movement analysis helps paint the picture of what do I actually need to describe as the trainer, as the instructor working with my student. What do I actually need to describe? I need to describe how, within that fundamental relationship, how is the rider controlling the board's pivot through flex, extension, rotation movements of the body? Is it happening through rotation movements of the body? Is it happening through flex and extension movements of the body? How? And adding that how is just a total game changer for getting better at movement analysis and applying these fundamentals for our job as instructors. So any one of those fundamentals, how is Tony Macri controlling tilt through flex extension and, how is Tony Macri controlling tilt through a combination of angulation and inclination in this picture? We can see there's some flexion in his ankles, knees, and hips. He's using a combination of angulation. There's minor inclination, and that's creating pretty high tilt. He's able to create pretty high tilt through that strong use of angulation and minimal use of inclination. We can see the carved track in the snow. How is Tony controlling pivot through flex, extension, rotation movements of the body? Well, he's reducing pivot by using flex and extension to tip the snowboard. He's using tilt to reduce pivot, and he's not creating pivot through rotational movements of the body. He's not turning the snowboard, he's tipping it on edge. So we can start to to clarify an image or a video by asking this question: how is the rider? And following that through with the fundamental. To get to that, we have to prioritize information, because 6 fundamentals, rider, your student's making 15 turns down to you. If you're trying to make notes in your notebook about 15 different turns, 8 toe turns and 7 heel side turns, and all 6 fundamentals, you're dealing with a lot of information. So we have to prioritize. And I like describing the snowboard fundamentals similar to going to the optometrist, and they pull down this machine in front of you. I haven't actually been to an optometrist in a while. They might be all digital now. I don't know, but at least you used to go to this, and they pulled this down in front of you, and they'd click the lenses, and they'd say, which one's clear? What makes the writing on the wall clear? Option 1 or option 2? And you say, oh, 1 was a little clear. And they'd go, cool. What about 3 or 4? And you went through, I mean, it felt like an hour that you're in that chair with them, flipping the lenses, right? Which one makes the writing on the wall more clear? And that's how I encourage you to view the fundamentals for movement analysis. For the desired outcome, which lens is going to create the most positive change? Which one's going to be the easiest to describe to your student or to the person you're training or to the examiner when you're sitting in your exam? Is controlling tilt going to be easier, or is controlling pressure across the width of the snowboard a better lens to view this rider through right now? Is controlling twist or controlling pivot the better lens to view this rider for the purpose of movement analysis, to be able to give them feedback? Because, for example, there's lots of relationships between fundamentals. We can use twist to help us pivot the snowboard better. Which one's going to be easier to describe in this specific outcome for this rider? So, for example, we've got Matt Larson in a board slide here. We can see some tilt happening relative to the rail. As he got on this rainbow, he was initially pretty stacked over the snowboard, looked pretty good first half of this board slide. And as the rainbow started to curve away down from him, he didn't make changes to his center mass in that relationship between the center mass and the snowboard, and he's ended up over the heel side edge. So the rider's creating some tilt here. We've got visible tilt on a box, which is not an ideal. Matt did ride away from this, which is very impressive, but we've got some tilt here, not super ideal. And we've got pressure management across the width of the snowboard. Up to you which fundamental you find easier to describe. There's not a right or a wrong here, but it's important to be able to prioritize information. For me, I find this image easier to talk through managing pressure across the width of the snowboard. Yes, there's tilt happening, but if I was going to pick one fundamental to talk about, me personally, I'd describe this as the rider controlling pressure across the width of the snowboard, because I find that one easier to describe. As the feature moved away from him, he didn't move his center mass forward to keep his pressure centered across the width of the snowboard. And so as the rail moved away from him, he ended up with pressure over his heel side edge. So he's not trying to, for me, he's not trying to control tilt in a carve here. He's not trying to tilt the snowboard. He's trying to stay centered. And so I find it easiest to talk about that fundamental. But there is no right or wrong. You could talk about any of the 6 fundamentals because they're always present. The important piece is, how do you find it easiest to prioritize information and be able to describe an image or a video or a person that you're watching on snow, and having that process for you? Lucky for you, next month, our entire focus is on MA and tech and developing a process for MA. This is just getting those fundamentals for technical understanding built. And next month, we'll be diving deep into how do we get better at MA. Which lens fundamental are most useful for describing change to this rider? What body movements are having an impact on those fundamentals? How is that body movement and board performance different from the desired outcome? That's our cause and effect. That's our evaluate. And prescription. What would you change to help this rider achieve the desired outcome? That's applying our fundamentals into movement analysis. Like I said, I would prioritize pressure across the width. I described that cause and effect. The rider didn't move their center mass forward. This is largely through ankle flexion. The rider didn't flex their ankles more to keep their center mass forward. We see a lot of hip flexion and a lot of knee flexion. So he could flex his knees a little bit less, or he could flex his ankles more to move the center mass forward to stay centered, kind of leaning into the future on this feature. versus staying in the past. And prescription for change would be to flex those ankles more. That's where I would go with this. Get a center mass further over the toe side or centered over the snowboard. Move towards the toe side, not over the toe side, to stay centered. Looking at other fundamentals, the board's pretty close to 90 degrees to the feature. I don't need to prioritize controlling pivot. He's already doing that. Looks like it's pretty much between the feet. So again, I don't really need to prioritize pressure along the length of the snowboard. He's pretty centered. He was moving right towards his desired outcome, which was a between the feet board slide. Magnitude of pressure, the rails moving away from him. That's certainly a bit of there might be a little bit of a application there of maybe how he absorbed or didn't absorb the rainbow to stay more centered. But again, I'm going to prioritize that pressure across the width because I think that's going to be the one that's going to make the biggest change, and trying to simplify that down from all 6 fundamentals being at play to maybe one key fundamental and then maybe one backup fundamental that you want to talk about. There you go. Examples following both pressure across the width and tilt in this case, but you could talk about either of them. As we look at level 2 and then especially moving into level 3 certification, linking more and more fundamentals becomes important. But this is kind of living within that level 2 zone in terms of cause and effect, linking 2 fundamentals together. Another example here. This is cheating on my part because this is actually Lindsay doing a carve turn, but I'm calling it a skidded turn for the purpose of this because we see intermediate students in this position in their skidded turns all the time. Which lens or fundamentals are most useful for describing change of this rider? What body movements are having an impact on those fundamentals? How is that body movement and board performance different from the desired outcome? And what would we change to help this rider achieve their desired outcome? Well, we can see that rear ankle, knee, and hip, ankle and knee way more flexed than the front ankle and knee because those hips are rotated open to the nose of the snowboard. Biomechanically, because our feet are attached to our snowboard, if we open our hips, it is going to straighten one leg and flex the other leg. And so as that rider opened up towards the nose of the snowboard, thinking about those reference alignments, right? The front foot, that reference is that the shoulders would be perpendicular to the front foot. Right now they're open beyond that. So the rider's open to the nose of the snowboard. That's twisting their hips, which is straightening their front leg, flexing their back leg. That's moving pressure aft on the snowboard. That's making it really hard for the tail of the snowboard to release from the snow and skid. So looking at that as an example of looking just at pivot, prioritizing how the rider, at pressure along the length of the snowboard, how the rider is controlling pressure along the length of the snowboard, and then what is the effect that's having on pivot? It's making it harder to pivot the snowboard as well. And we could, any still image, any video, take this same concept. How's the rider controlling pressure along the length of the snowboard? They're way over their nose, maybe too far over their nose. How are they doing that? Was it through moving the snowboard underneath the center mass or moving their center mass over the snowboard? We could go through those. We can prioritize, look at cause and effect, what's different from the ideal, and then make a prescription comparing that back to the ideal. Tons of different examples here. Again, great way to practice, taking a still image, starting to try to find one fundamental you want to highlight, looking through this, prioritizing a fundamental or 2. What's the cause and effect? How is it different from the ideal? And what would your prescription be? And then taking it from stills into images, or from stills into videos, starts to amplify that, taking it from video to live on snow, really where we start to hone our skills. I wanted to share a couple of additional resources, stuff that this is pulled from. The Snowboard Technical Manual, obviously, as I said, there is a new version coming out, hopefully in 2027. That's the goal. The Snowboard Teaching Handbook, that's the small one. The Pocket Handbook has some additional materials. It's a year or 2 older than the technical manual. So again, snowboard fundamentals aren't going to be in there, but all of this is founded in the Snowboard Technical Manual and in the Teaching Handbook. It hasn't changed. The concepts haven't changed, just the description of the fundamentals have changed. There's a great article in 32 Degrees from winter of 2023, and it's on page 78. Those are all available on the PSIA AASI website. If you are a current member, you can find those back issues digitally and look that one up. That really dives into each fundamental and how to describe movements relating those fundamentals, those body movements into the board performances, into the fundamentals for each of those. The YouTube link there is a snowboard team YouTube chat that's from the 2021 to 24 snowboard team. The last term of the snowboard team did a YouTube chat on each fundamental. And you can write that link down if you want, or I can put it in the chat as well. And then the PSIA certification standards and performance guides, those are on the certification tab on the national website. And those have the fundamentals as well as like all of the fundamentals, the teaching fundamentals, the people skills fundamentals, the technical fundamentals for each discipline. Those are all available in a PDF there. That link may not be accurate. I didn't think to update that, and the new website came out this spring, so that link may not be good, but it's available, and I can pull it up once we stop recording and share that link. So that wraps up the presentation. We do have a few minutes for questions and answers. I'm going to stop sharing here if this spurred some topics. Next week's call on Tuesday at 6 p.m. The rest of the months will be 6 to 7:30, so they're an hour and a half for the second, third, and fourth weeks each month. And next week's, the second week of each month, is really clarification questions. So if as you're thinking about this through the week, if there's things that pop up, make a note and plan to dive into deeper discussions next week. But I'm happy to take a few minutes here for anything that came up tonight that you guys want to jump into. Well, crew, I really want to thank you for spending your Tuesday evening, afternoon, depending on your time zone, with me. I will be leading again next week for clarification and conversations around this. The rest of the month will not be recorded, so we're able to have more free conversations, and it'll be less presentation, more just chit chat and discussion. So hope to see you guys again next week, and please stay engaged through this summer. Share the fact that these are going on. I don't know that the communication has been super dialed yet with getting the word out that we're running these, but I'm stoked to see 11 people on here tonight. I was about to say 12, but that includes me. But awesome to have you guys spending time here, keeping the brains engaged through the summer. And please do share with your training manager at your home mountain. If you're finding these helpful, make sure that people know, especially Vail Resorts leadership people, know that these are helpful, that they're impactful. That's how we get to keep doing them. So thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next week.